So in my last video, I discussed how I would do a DCU Batman saga, and you guys for the most part seem to really like that video. It's doing pretty well compared to my recent ones. So although initially I was going to do storylines for the DCU part 2 for this video, I instead decided to write this one, that being how I would do a DCU Superman saga. So similarly to how we did things with the Batman saga video, this isn't going to be my own completely clean slate original idea. I'm going off of what we know about the character already. So for example, with the Batman video, we already know that Batman and Damian Wayne are going to be the co-leads of the film, and it's going to be a Batman and Robin centric story. So I decided to build off of that. So with this Superman saga, I'm going to be building off of the Superman movie that comes out July 11th, as well as the Supergirl movie that comes out July of next year. And we're just gonna build from there. Without further ado, let's just jump right into things, starting with Superman. This movie is set to release on July 11th, 2025, and it's going to be directed by James Gunn. David Corenswet will star as Superman, Rachel Brosnahan will be playing Lois Lane, and Nicholas Hoult will be starring as Lex Luthor in the main antagonist role. The premise states that the film will focus on Superman's journey to reconcile his Kryptonian heritage with his adoptive human family. Obviously, that's a pretty vague description of the movie, but I think we can start to guess what the plot will focus on based on the trailers. So before we get into that, I'm just going to issue a quick potential spoiler warning. These are my educated guesses. I could be wrong, I could be right, I'm not really sure. But if you don't want the movie to be ruined, I would suggest just skipping through this to this timestamp right here. So the main antagonist of the Superman film is going to be Lex Luthor, played by Nicholas Hoult. He seemingly is going to be sending various villains after Superman, such as this kaiju and this mysterious character we've seen Superman fighting in the trailers. We also know that the Justice League International will be featured in this film, with members Hawkgirl, Green Lantern, and Mr. Terrific. Metamorpho will also be in this film, but it's unclear if he'll be on the makeshift Justice League roster or not. I think this will be a pretty textbook Superman story in the sense that Lex Luthor resents and fears him, and does everything in his power to destroy him, but ultimately fails. I also see Lex as somebody that will probably stick around in the DCU for a long time, even if he's only the villain of one Superman movie. Kind of like a Loki situation from the MCU. Similar to how Loki showed up in each of the first 3 Thor movies, I think there's a pretty good chance Lex would show up in most Superman films and or a Justice League film or 2. We know that this is not going to be a Superman origin story. At this point, Superman is an established hero and the general public knows about him. I do, however, think that this will be the origin of the new era of heroes in the DCU, and let me explain what I mean by that. So we know that James Gunn is taking a lot of inspiration from Mark Waid and Alex Ross's story, Kingdom Come, even down to the Superman symbol being pretty much the exact same aside from some color variation. This story takes place well into the DCU future, and superheroes have become much more corporate, with lots of superheroes being sponsored. They are also much more reckless and are superheroes more so for the spectacle and the fame rather than actually caring for the greater good of the people. Well, without giving too much of the story away, because I really think you should read it if you haven't, it's one of the best DC stories ever published in my opinion. Superman returns and more or less begins teaching the young heroes how to be a superhero the right way. Now, obviously, Kingdom Come takes place in a far distant alternate DC future where all the League members are much older. That won't be the case for this film, but I do think Superman in a way will be modeling how to be a hero in the correct way to the current generation of heroes. Those heroes being the Justice League International. Based on what we saw in the Peacemaker trailer, the Justice League International exists, led by Maxwell Lord and featuring Guy Gardner, Hawkgirl, and Mr. Terrific. My guess is that these heroes will be similar to the younger generation of heroes in Kingdom Come, where they're corporate sponsored heroes and not really in it for the people, but in the film they see Superman model what it means to be a hero and eventually follow in his footsteps. So yeah, I'm sure in the end Lex Luthor is defeated, the Justice League International begin to align more with Superman's ideologies, and we get a strong opening to the DCU. I'm definitely biased, but I am a big fan of James Gunn as a filmmaker, so I am pretty confident this is going to be a good film. Whether or not people are going to be interested in a Superman film in 2025 is a different story, but I think it at least will be quality. At the end of the film, I would have Supergirl arrive on Earth, teasing her movie that is set to release next summer, but also her involvement with the rest of the DCU's heroes going forward. Then, following up the Superman film, a year later we have Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, set to release in July of 2026. The film is going to be directed by Craig Gillespie, starring Millie Alcock as Supergirl, Eve Ridley as Ruth, Matthias Schoenaerts as Krem of the Yellow Hills, and Jason Momoa as Lobo. As far as we know, this is going to be a pretty direct adaptation of Tom King's comic book Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, a sci-fi space western about a young girl whose family is killed, and she enlists the help of Supergirl to track down and kill the man who killed her family for revenge. It's a pretty classic western story archetype, and it's really effective. I've said this a few times on the channel before, but I am a pretty big fan of Tom King, and I think this is one of his best stories. I would definitely recommend picking this one up if you haven't yet. King also stated that in the original story he wanted to include Lobo, but editorial said no. So now that Lobo is going to be part of the story, we'll get to see Tom King's full original vision for the story, which I don't think will be that much different, but it's a cool detail that's come out about the development of this movie nonetheless. Also, I really like the way James Gunn has described the character of Kara Zor-El for this film. He describes the contrast of Superman and Supergirl by explaining that Supergirl watched the destruction of Krypton as a teenager. She watched as her planet was destroyed, with her city being saved by Zor-El. She grew up in a fragmented civilization of Krypton, a floating rock being the last surviving remnant of the Kryptonians. Because of the trauma of watching her planet explode, and contrary to Superman being sentient when it happened, she grew to be much more rage-filled as an adult. This is one of the main fundamental differences between her and Superman. I think that this is a really good interpretation of the character, and it's good for separating Supergirl from Superman. Obviously, they still have to get it down in the movie, but they're on the right track. Honestly, I think this is a really good story to adapt into a movie. I don't really have much to add on plot because I think it'll be a pretty direct adaptation, and I don't want to spoil anything. If you don't want to pick up the comic book, I suggest watching the movie True Grit. I never saw the original, but the 2010 version of the film is one of my favorite westerns. Haley Steinfeld plays a little girl trying to get somebody's help to get revenge on her father's killer. The story is very similar to Woman of Tomorrow, and I'd be shocked if Tom King didn't take at least a little inspiration from this story. Ruthie in Supergirl reminds me so much of Haley Steinfeld's character in True Grit, it cannot be a coincidence. Then, at the end of the movie, Supergirl heads to Earth, which is what we saw at the ending of the Superman movie. In this film's post-credits scene though, or maybe just the ending in general, I would set up Brainiac as a villain going forward. Like maybe he recognizes the House of L symbol on Supergirl's ship and starts tracking her. This ending sets up our third film in the Superman saga, that being Batman and Superman: World's Finest. I think it's due time we get a Batman and Superman team-up film on the big screen. And I know they technically teamed up at the end of Batman vs Superman, but most of the movie is them fighting each other, which is not something I want to see. These guys are supposed to be friends, not enemies. Sure, it's fine to have Batman not trust him at first, and of course he's going to disagree with him fundamentally, but to have him go full-blown murderous Batman mode and try to kill Superman is just ridiculous to me. Like, dude, the Joker is still alive. Why are you trying to kill somebody that very obviously has good intentions? DCEU Batman really pissed me off sometimes, especially because I think they nailed the casting with Ben Affleck and then just completely wasted it. Anyway, I'm totally off track. The point is, this duo is awesome and they deserve a movie focusing on them. Their dynamic is so great because Superman represents hope, optimism, and light, while Batman represents fear, pessimism, and dark. I guess that's a very simplistic way of putting it, but that's pretty much the general idea. It's the opposites in their beliefs and fundamental ideas that make their dynamics so fun to watch. The movie would obviously have a central focus on Batman and Superman, but Supergirl would also be a heavy supporting role in the film, being the main reason that Brainiac comes to Earth. Also, like I mentioned earlier with Lex, he's going to be in this film playing a sort of Loki role. For the story basis, I'd go with the Action Comics storyline Superman Brainiac by Jeff Johns. This is a story that retcons all of Superman's previous encounters with Brainiac, with the explanation of his previous encounters being that they were all just drones sent by the real Brainiac, who has now arrived on Earth. Brainiac is a supercomputer, and his purpose and goal is to endlessly collect data. Once finished collecting data from different civilizations, he destroys the remnants, making it impossible for anyone else to gain the same knowledge as him. In this story, he arrives to bottle the city of Metropolis and eventually destroy the rest of the planet. So yeah, the movie would unfold something like this. Supergirl crash lands on Earth and meets Superman, who to her surprise is all grown up. Meanwhile, Brainiac begins sending drones down to Earth to scout the planet. These drones catch the attention of Batman, who now is distrusting of Supergirl and thinks something is connecting her to the drones. Obviously, we know that it's Brainiac, but Batman just sees it as a ship crash landed, and then right after, drones start coming down from the sky. This is how you eventually are going to connect Batman and Superman. I think with Batman, you could make his arc really interesting, where his approach to the situation is very similar to Lex from the first movie initially, and when I say initially, I mean for like the first 30-ish minutes. Batman doesn't trust the Kryptonians and fears their power, but as clues start showing themselves and the true story of Brainiac's invasion comes to light, him, Superman, and Supergirl all get on the same page. You could show the similarities in thinking between Bruce and Lex Luthor, where they both have valid concerns for the amount of power the Kryptonians possess. However, Bruce is much more open-minded than Lex, and thus is able to change his view on Superman, whereas Lex's ego is much too big to do so. I also think you can incorporate one of my favorite episodes from JLU, where Lex Luthor merges with Brainiac. We know that in the Superman film coming out next month, Lex will have possession of some sort of kryptonite. In JLU, the exposure to kryptonite actually ends up making him terminally ill. So here's what I'm thinking. Brainiac wants to invade Earth, but worries that 2 Kryptonians is something that he would have trouble dealing with. Lex, who is now terminally ill from his exposure to kryptonite in the first movie, goes to Brainiac with a proposal. Lex tells Brainiac if he cures him, he'll give him kryptonite to help defeat the Kryptonians. And then Brainiac says the only way to save Lex is by merging him with Brainiac's computer, thus creating Lexniac. I don't think you have have to do that by any means. It might look a little clunky in live action, but I wanted to at least bring it up because I think it's a really good story from the cartoon. You could definitely just do the classic route though, where Brainiac comes to invade and bottle the city and fight Superman in the process, but I do think the Lexniak story is pretty interesting and makes it so Lex has a bigger role in the story. But yeah, Batman meets Superman and Supergirl for the first time. He is distrusting of them at first, but eventually comes around once he realizes they're not behind the issue. I want to be clear, Batman is not out for blood on the Kryptonians. He would be distrusting, but he wouldn't be training to kill them. He also wouldn't be teaming up with them out of necessity, but because he eventually comes around to trusting them. They'd start as uneasy allies, but become friends by the end of the film. In the end, they end up defeating Brainiac and saving the planet. Following these events, they realize they're going to need to form a bigger team to be prepared in case threats like this show up again. Also, at the end of the film, I'd have the reveal that Lois is now pregnant with her and Clark's first child. I will say though, the fact that Damian is being introduced as the starting DCU Robin really makes the dynamic between him and John Kent weird. These two are very similar in age in the comics and are best friends, but I don't think they're going to be able to make that work in the movies unless they age John Kent up somehow, which is the point in comics where his character became infinitely less interesting. Regardless, I'm just not going to think too much about it. Let's just move on. Bringing us on to the next film, we have the sequel to Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, that being Supergirl and the Legion of Superheroes. So this would be based off of Jeff Johns' story, Superman and the Legion of Superheroes, where the Legion go back in time because they need Superman's help. In our DCU version, the Legion will instead go back to get Supergirl, as Clark is busy raising his firstborn son, John Kent, at this point. The Legion are pivotal to the Superman mythos, especially pre-Crisis. If you're not familiar with them, they're a superhero team from the 31st century, made up of heroes from various planets and backgrounds trying to do the right thing. In this far future, Superman is pretty much a legend, known as the greatest superhero of all time. Originally, I was going to make this a Superman movie, but I feel like it would be a bit of a detour for him, and besides, Supergirl has been named as one of the pillars of the DCU, so I think it's safe to assume she'll be getting more than one project. Anyway, in this comic story, the Legion recruits Superman to help them in the 31st century. In this time period, a team of xenophobic superheroes called the Justice League of Earth have taken control of the superhero scene. They're all humans with an anti-alien agenda and became bitter when they were rejected from becoming members of the Legion. They decided to band together and take over, and in the process, rewrote the history of Superman. This team claims that Superman was actually from Earth and that he fought for Earth against alien invaders. Because of their anti-alien agenda, they're naturally against the Legion, which is filled with aliens. They began hunting them down and taking them out, which led to the Legion's desperate move to go back and get Superman. So we'll be taking that same story, but instead of Superman helping the Legion regroup and defeat the Justice League of Earth, we'll have Supergirl do it. This gives her more time to shine by herself, as well as introducing a team that most audiences wouldn't be familiar with, being the Legion of Superheroes. There are so many interesting characters in the Legion that I think need more attention. Lightning Lad, Cosmic Boy, Saturn Girl, Timberwolf, Brainiac 5, Mon-El, the list goes on of cool characters on this team. But yeah, I'd love to see Supergirl team up with the Legion in the far future for a film. I think it would be a ton of fun, and I also, in general, would just love to see a sequel to Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow if it ends up being a good movie, because Supergirl isn't just a girl version of Superman. Like, they are fundamentally pretty different characters, and I think she deserves more than one project, and I think they're probably planning on giving her more than one project because she's been named as one of the pillars of the DCU. Bringing us on to the last project in this saga, we have Superman 3, which would be titled Superman Warworld. So this is a pretty recent storyline from DC Comics. I want to say it came out in 2021 or 2022, and it was written by Philip Kennedy Johnson. I gotta say, this is one of my favorite Superman stories that has come out in years. A group of mysterious refugees are discovered by Superman after crash landing on Earth, and they begin speaking an ancient Kryptonian dialect that only Superman can understand. Eventually, it's revealed that these refugees are Philosians, descendants of Kryptonians that left Krypton to explore the cosmos long before its destruction. When found, the Philosians have chains attached to them that dampen their powers. Even Superman feels the effects when he touches them. He works with Mr. Terrific to eventually find out that the chains are tied to Mongul's Warworld. And for those that don't know, Mongul is the leader of Warworld. He's this big, almost dark-side looking character that rules tyrannically over this planet. The reason it's called Warworld is because Mongul forces Warworld's citizens to fight not only for entertainment purposes, but also for survival. Gladiators are put into recurring death matches where they move up in society if they win and, well, die if they lose. That's a pretty brief description of the setup for the story. Like a few other stories on this list, I definitely recommend you go read this one if you haven't yet. It's one of my favorite modern Superman stories. Warworld is also lit by red sun sunlight, meaning that Kryptonians like Superman and Supergirl would be much less powerful, as the yellow sun on Earth is what gives them their powers. That's another thing I really like about this story. It shows you that Superman is more than just his strength and powers. It's about Superman being inspiring and how good he he is as a leader. Also, the thing that works really well for Mongol being the villain of this third Superman film is that Mongol is pretty much the antithesis to Hope in this story. He constantly gives off the image of Hope being dead on his planet, with slavery and death matches being the norm. So when Superman shows up, willingly heading to a planet system he is much weaker in and knowing he might die, it's very inspiring to the people of Warworld. But yeah, the book sees Superman assemble a team of heroes to go liberate Warworld and free those that are enslaved and forced to fight. In the book, I think that the team he assembles consists of himself, Natasha Irons, Apollo, Midnighter, and Manchester Black. Our team is going to be just a bit different though. So we're gonna do Superman, obviously. We'll do Supergirl fresh off of her trip to the future, but then we're gonna introduce a bit of a wild card with a new character in the form of John Henry Irons, aka Steel. He's a pretty cool character, essentially an Iron Man and Superman hybrid. Originally in the comics, he created his Superman suit to be a replacement to Clark following the death of Superman, but we're not doing the death of Superman in this universe, so instead we could just have him picking up some of Superman's slack since having a kid or something. I really like Steel because his main strength is his brain. He's a former weapons engineer turned superhero, and I think it would suck to not see him in the DCU. I think at this point he's a pretty central character to the Superman mythos, so we're gonna throw him in there. He's going to Warworld with Superman and Supergirl. I would also throw Connor Kent in there. Now, I know I haven't mentioned him previously, but in my own headcanon of this universe, Connor is a Titans character, and Superman doesn't even know about him for a good portion of time. For those that don't know, Connor is a clone of both Superman and Lex Luthor. In my mind, he'd be rescued by the Titans from LexCorp, similar to how it was done in Young Justice, then he'd stay with them and avoid interacting with Superman for a while. One big theme from Connor's character in the Young Justice show is that he feels like an imposter and that he isn't normal because he's genetically engineered. I think by having him join Superman and going to Warworld, fighting for the enslaved Philosians as well as other races, you could have a really effective character arc for him. And then I'd throw in Apollo and Midnighter as well, because I love those guys and you just know their action scenes would kick ass. So yeah, Superman goes to Warworld, we get a huge scale action movie following the Kryptonian Avengers taking down Mongol and his Warzoons, and in the end they return home victorious, liberating Warworld and taking down Mongol once and for all. I also forgot to mention, John Kent will be in Warworld, but it'll be very brief. I mean, he's not going to go to Warworld. Obviously, he's probably only like 3 years old at this point. But yeah, I thought I'd just throw that detail in there before we wrap it up. So anyways, guys, that is how I would do a DCU Superman saga. Let me know if you enjoyed the video and let me know what character you want to see next, because these two videos, this one and the Batman one, have been the most fun videos to write for me. I'm about halfway through writing the Storylines Part 2 video, so I think that's going to be the next video I work on. I'm also starting my summer semester for college, so things are going to get a little bit difficult. Not like they haven't been already, but I mean, most of that was because I couldn't afford Adobe. But anyway, I'm completely rambling. I really appreciate your guys' support, especially on the last video. That meant a lot to me. We did just recently hit 7K. We're going to try and hit 10K before 2026. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.